May your words only be spoken, and more importantly, your words only be heard. Amen. Our collect, the collecting prayer that is at the beginning of the service. There's a unique prayer for each week. It implores this morning, grant us, Lord, not to be anxious about earthly things. Well, I don't know about you, but earthly things, as in things of this fragile earth, our island home, were front and center this week. I wrote a letter to the parish just a couple of weeks ago, and as I was writing, I sat in the moment of where I was, and I heard the cicadas singing loudly, and I could see between my house and my neighbor's house across the street and through the trees a fiery sunset. It looked like the sky was on fire. And this week, images of red and orange skies flooded our news. Now, the same physics is at work. Light of shorter wavelengths is being absorbed by particles in the air. But this time, instead of water and whatever else, the particles were ash and smoke. So this time the skies were no awesome reflection of a sunset, but reflections of flames and light trying to dance through this ash and smoke. Australia was on fire in January. Australia's on the other side of the earth, so it's very far away. But under very similar meteorological and geographical conditions, the Western United States is on fire now. Fire is part of the created world. The right mix of oxygen, fuel, and a spark, and energy is transformed and released. The same chemistry brings a candle flame that centers us in prayer. The same chemistry brings heat to warm a home. And the same chemistry sets a wildfire destroying anything in its path. The displacement, the loss, and the expense is absolutely real. But there's no evil at work. No judgment of those caught in the path of the flames. God is not picking one family to have their home be fuel for the fire and another to be left untouched. Underneath it all, the earth is crying out, and innocent people are paying the price. And as if fire wasn't enough, one hurricane after another is bringing flood and destruction to our southern and eastern coastlines. Would that the hurricanes could dump the water on the fires. It just doesn't work that way. With the right conditions of wind, air, and water temperatures, hurricanes can move amazing quantities of water very efficiently from point A over a big body of water to point B, wherever the air conditions steer it. There's no evil in a hurricane. There's no judgment of who's in its path or not. The earth is crying out. Innocent people are paying the price. I'd rather call these fires and floods expressions of creation rather than, as insurance companies might, acts of God. I can completely understand how our ancestors may have attributed anything and everything inexplicable to the whim or judgment of God. We've been curious since the beginning, and we know more now. Given all that we've learned about the workings of creation through the study of physics and chemistry and biology, there are still things which are inexplicable. The depth of the human heart and soul, the mystery of love, and new discoveries ever deeper and ever further out, new discoveries of creation. In our Psalms, we hear that all creation speaks of the glory of God. And that idea is born when Jesus was born as in carried, when the Magi saw in the dark sky a star that told them God was doing a new thing. That's what they understood it to mean. The sky reaching out with the message. And in Jesus' life, he acknowledged that we know how to read signs in the skies. He said to be attentive to the wheat in the field and the lilies of the field. And then on Good Friday, or God's Friday, the Gospels proclaimed that darkness covered the earth, meaning that earth and sky were joining together at the cross. The glory of God in a human being fully alive on that cross, Jesus Christ, Son of Man, Son of God. And in 3 days, which is to say in God's time, a new awakening, a new, inexplicable, and even absurd hope would dawn. Death is not the end. God of gracious, generous, inexplicable love would prevail. Bishop Stephen Charleston, a retired bishop in the Episcopal Church, Native American elder, and the wisest man I have ever had the privilege of knowing, posted this on Facebook on Thursday. We are in a time of awakening. One of our leaders for environmental justice, Al Gore, used that word just last night in an interview, and I think he is right. We are waking up. It is not easy, but we are waking up. We are becoming alert to the fault lines that have made our culture more fragile than we imagined. We are seeing the injustice, the inequality, and the pain. We are waking up to the result of past mistakes, come back to confront us with climate change. We are living between flood and fire. Now we are engaged in a great process of political change. We are opening our eyes to the end of chaos and the beginning of renewal. And even if we are not sure where we go next, we are spiritually more aware than we have been in a very long time. The awakening has begun. I trust his words. I trust his capacity to articulate deeper spiritual movement and inspiration. And notice all of this is we are. We are. Our gospel reading is set in a piece of creation, a vineyard, sign of production, sign of harvest, sign of goodwill and life. The laborers in the vineyard had a bit of their own awakening. Jesus tells of some workers who woke up early in the morning and went to the place where day laborers go to be hired. A landowner with a vineyard picks up a crew of workers. We don't know if he picked up everyone who was there or just what would fit in the back of his truck. And he goes back 3 hours later, and again 3 hours later, and again near the end of the day, each time bringing more workers to his vineyard. And each of these laborers agrees to the standard wage for day labor in that place and time, which was a denarius. So at the end of the day, those denarius are being passed out. If you were one of those early workers, how would you feel? Gypped? Betrayed? Jealous? Was your carefully developed sense of fairness violated? Or maybe you are just tired and disappointed and grumbling that you'll never work for this employer again. And what if you were one of those latecomers? Maybe you'd feel like a table server we occasionally hear of that gets an extraordinary tip of $500 for a cup of coffee and a bowl of soup. Nothing in this parable is about fairness or judgment or doing the right thing, righteous thing. The key is in the last line when the landowner responds to the grumbling of the laborers. He asks, "Are you envious because I am generous?" Another expression of this line, less poetic but perhaps closer to the original language, is your eye evil because I am good? Is your eye evil because I am good? Coming into their workday with expectation, they have become disoriented by the landowner's generosity and goodness. They are awakened to goodness, awakened to a goodness that is, a generosity that simply is. So we can stand with those workers and be awakened ourselves by the gracious generosity of a God whose embodiment is love. When we gather for Eucharist, we say what's called the affirmation of faith. There's different forms, but the most familiar one is these 3 lines. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. And time collapses, past, present, and future, in those words. The darkness of these days might be a long Good Friday, but we proclaim that we will again know the joy of Easter. Easter hope, this ultimate expression of goodness that cannot be bound by earthly things and evil eyes, and worse. This Easter hope is truly an absurd hope. Fire and flood will not have their last word. God's grace is pouring out in the responses of family, friends, and total strangers. That grace needs to reach even further to the innocent, impacted by these tragedies that they did not deserve in any way. Through this absurd Easter hope, look for the grace of God. And as we all can, let us be agents of the grace of God, joining in an inspired flow by prayer and by whatever else is within your capacity. If you have financial resources, Episcopal Relief and Development is always a good possibility. This absurd hope is what endures as the reality of a planet Earth growing hotter cries out for relief. Next time you see a fiery sunset, enjoy it. Breathe in the beauty, but let it call to you also. Let a fiery sunset be a wake-up call, a renewed awakening to care for this fragile Earth, our island home. We cannot change the past that brought us to this point. We can change the future. We change the future by, in this moment, making small and growing changes. We can be stewards of its renewal and agents of a generous goodness, agents of God's grace. And the first step is to imagine. Imagine for yourself being that calm presence in the face of earthly things. Being an agent of grace, steadfast in an Easter hope that endures. Thanks be to God.